All right, and here we go with lecture 10. The course is flying by, right? So today, this one should take about 45 minutes, somewhere around there. And I'm going to begin the lecture by insulting your intelligence, okay? Because we're going to talk about spelling. Now, I know what you're thinking. Really? My only point about spelling, the first page will take about 20 seconds, all right? I found this poem online, and it's called Ode to a Spell Checker. And in every line, there is a mistake. There is a mistake. But yet, spell check did not catch any of those. And so if you take a look at some of the spellings here, you'll see exactly what I mean. My point today is don't rely on spell check like as the only device to edit your paper. Okay, for all your papers in university, spell check won't catch everything. Yes, it is a handy little tool, but it's not 100% foolproof. Okay, so I don't even need to read out much of it, but I have a spelling checker here. Sorry, I have a spelling checker. It came with my PC. It plainly marks for my review mistakes I cannot see. But look at all the spellings. They're all incorrect, right? Not all, but most of them are incorrect. Okay, so my point being, technology is great. Technology, like there's so many advantages to technology, but it doesn't solve everything. There is still the human element that you want to consider when it comes to your writing. Okay, so keep that in mind, please. All right. Anyway, so that's page one. maybe the lecture won't be as long as I think today. And then, and again, I'm not joking about this kind of stuff. Let's consider the word ride. Okay, I don't need to it's right there. There's the word. What happens when you add an ing ending to the word ride? Well, okay. Let's say I wanted to add an ing ending to the word ride, and so I wrote ridding. Okay? Well, that's incorrect. Will spell check catch that? No, because there is such a word as ridding. Right? I'm ridding myself of all the clutter in my house. Okay, so that word does exist. So spell check wouldn't catch that. So here's a couple of things just to consider. Okay, a couple of quick rules. They apply to a small number of words, but still, you don't want to make these mistakes in your writing and then have someone, like if you make a mistake like ridding instead of writing, yeah, someone would catch that, and it wouldn't reflect well on a grade. I wouldn't think. Okay, and so let's take a look quickly at the rules. Okay, when do we drop the final silent e, and when do we include it? The final silent e when you have a word like ride, right? In fact, at one time, the word ride in Middle English would have been pronounced rid, right? Like there are reasons why these constructions still exist, right? Well, at least I should say there are reasons why these constructions existed when they did. That didn't make any sense, but I think you understand what I mean. Over the years, pronunciation changes, right? Formidable. When did formidable become formidable? Like that's when I've noticed. Like anyway. So the first rule will tell us when to drop the final silent e, and then the second rule will tell us when to keep it. And so, you drop the final silent E when adding an ending beginning with a vowel. Really straightforward stuff. And for the most part, spell check will catch these things, okay? Then, we keep the final silent E when adding an ending beginning with a consonant. And so I think my example here is perfect, right? Or at least it's clear. Think of the word like. So, liking, right? Vowel ending, or a vowel suffix, then we would drop the final silent e. Likeness, okay, with a consonant ending, or you follow what I mean. Then we would keep the final silent e, likeness, right? So that's the way that works. Okay. Okay. Now there are 3 exceptions to this rule. 3 exceptions. 2 of them I'm not too worried about because spell check will catch them. You don't have to worry. But one of them, I want to just make a quick note about it. Be aware of this, okay? All right. When we have words such as argument and ninth, they don't follow the rule. So, but again, spell check will catch that. If you were to add the e in ninth, like spell check would catch that. But the one word I want you to be aware of is the word truly, because for some reason people they'll almost go against spell check when they have, say, something like a cover letter. And when you have a cover letter, you might end off the cover letter with the phrase yours truly, right? Well, if you were to include the E in truly, right? If you were to include the E, that is not a good reflection on your oh God, what's the word I'm thinking of here? Your cover letter, okay? I don't know why I couldn't come up with that word, but anyway. Now, there's one other this is a really rare example, but when you have, let's just read the note here. After a soft C, as in notice, so the C usually would be the hard sound, but here it's a soft sound, notice, and a soft G, as in change. We keep the final silent E when adding an ending beginning with A or O, but spell check will catch those, okay? But here's, if you want an example, here's two here: noticeable and outrageous. Okay? But as I said, spell check would catch that one. Okay? Or those examples. So don't worry about that. Now, this next point goes back to the very first thing I started talking about, okay, with ridding. When do we double the final consonant and when do we not? The second rule applies where you double the final consonant when adding an end to a word. Okay? And so when we're adding an ending to the word, okay, a word, I should say. Oops, my page is all, there we go. This is a bit complicated, but my example, I think, will work really well. So when adding an ending beginning with a vowel, such as able, ing, ed, er, you double the final consonant of the root of the word. Now, do we understand what a root word means? That's the base word. Then we can add stuff to it. We can add a prefix or we can add a suffix, right? Endings are suffixes. Prefixes are, un, dis. Remember what I was talking about in the last lecture? Okay? So little terms like that. And so we basically follow this rule when it comes to the root word, the base word, okay? You double the final consonant of the root of the word if the word ends with a single consonant preceded by a single vowel and is stressed on the last syllable. So that sounds complicated. I know it sounds complicated, but take a look at the word commit. And think of the way I just pronounced it, commit. So you got two syllables there, but the emphasis is on the second syllable. And so in that regard, okay, or in that case, I would double the final consonant, committing. Okay? And there's many, many other words like that, all right? But commit, submit, whatever. Okay? All right. And then we have rule number 3. And this one, I think many of you would have learned as children, right? I before E, except after C, when sounds like A, as in neighbor or way, right? I'm pretty sure. And there's about 1,000 words in the English language like that. Yeah, with either the IE or EI construction. So that's a handy one to know. And if you didn't learn that, that is your, like the language here is pretty clear. I before E, except after C, or is it sounded like A, as in neighbor or way. But then there's a second part to that as well that many people don't remember. If short E or long I is the sound that is right, write E before I, as in there or in height. Okay? Again, though, for those examples, I think spell check would catch almost every, if not every one of them. I think. All right? Okay. So that pretty straightforward stuff, right? Like, all I'm suggesting there is don't rely on spell check 100% of the time, okay? Because it may not work, all right? As we saw with the poem that I started with. Now, let's get into really more sophisticated subject-verb agreement. Subject and verbs, so far, I've only been talking about very simple sentences. Let's go back to well, I think it was what, lecture 9, where I said, John hit the baseball. Okay, really, really straightforward. Okay. But in lecture 9, I also started talking about two different styles of sentences, compound and complex. And if you remember, with the complex, I started suggesting that now sentences could be working on more than one level. And so that's where we started to get into the subordinate, right? Subordinate clauses. Sometimes, depending upon the way we set up our sentences, we can create problems, especially when it comes to subordination. And that's exactly what I'm going to show you here. There's so many different rules we could get into, and I just want you to be aware of them, okay? So when we think of the subject, let's go back now to what I said before. Every sentence is about someone or something. Okay, so we know that. Well, some subjects, though, can be tricky. They can look singular when they're actually plural, and they can look plural when they're actually singular. And so let's take a look at some examples here because, as I said, this can get really complicated. Okay. Basically, we have something known as collective nouns. So let me just read out the straight dictionary definition, or the definition. A collective noun is a word, one word, okay, usually one word, naming a group. And so quick examples: band, okay, orchestra, gang, company, like all types of words, okay? And again, they sound pretty straightforward. But when you're referring to the group as one unit, this is going to sound really strange in a second when I give you the example I'm going to give you. When I refer to the group as one unit, then I use the singular. But when I refer to members of the group, well, then obviously I use the plural. So the plural is easy. When you start referring to members of the group, right, then it's very straightforward. But let's just say, I'm going to give you an example now, which is correct, but you would almost never want to use it because most people would want to correct you. The Ottawa Senators is a great organization, okay? Or whatever team, pick a team, all right? Here's a good example. The Tampa Bay Lightning is a great organization. Now, and by the way, both were correct. The Ottawa Senators is a great organization is correct, but it doesn't sound right because you have that S ending. And so you would think that you should have to say the Ottawa Senators are a great organization. But if you're talking about the organization as one unit, well, then technically the answer is. But as I said, you probably wouldn't want to say that to someone only because they would want to correct you. But the Tampa Bay Lightning, right, now that you don't have that S ending, is a great organization. That sounds a bit better, right? So the key is, are we talking about it as a unit, or are we talking about it as members of the group, of the organization, what have you, okay? The players on the Tampa Bay Lightning are really skilled. Then it's are, because I said the players. But if I'm talking about it as a unit, then it's is. Very confusing. I know, very confusing. And so that's one example of confusing subject-verb agreement. But there are others. Multiple subjects, right? Let's just say we have more than one subject in a sentence. Well then, they would obviously be connected with the word and it wouldn't be a problem, okay? But watch out when all of a sudden you have two or more elements, okay, of a multiple subject that are joined by either or, neither nor. These can really trip up a reader and a writer unless you follow this very simple rule. When I explain the rule, the definition isn't all that great. But when you see the example, you think, oh, okay, I get it. So, in these cases, when you have more than one subject, and the subjects, I should say, are connected with phrases like or, neither nor, either or, okay, then you have to follow this rule. And it like I said, the examples are very clear. In these cases, the verb agrees, okay, in number with the nearest subject. So right now you're watching this thinking, what the hell is he talking about? Don't worry. Let's take a quick example at two. Sorry, let's take a quick look at two examples. Okay? All right. If the subject closest to the verb is singular, then we would use the singular verb. If the subject closest to the verb is plural, then we use the plural verb. Take a look at the two examples, very clear. Neither the Prime Minister nor the Cabinet Ministers are responsible. Okay? So, because ministers is plural, okay, we have to use the plural verb are. But let's just say I wrote neither the Cabinet Ministers nor the Prime Minister. Well then, the proper construction would be is responsible. So that's a good one to know, only because it may come up in a grammar test, but also, right, it's just one of those weird constructions that you'd never think about, okay? But that's the rule. Okay, now I'm going to get into something. This should take, I'm not quite sure how long, but I've actually referred to this before, okay? All right. Sometimes subjects can look multiple when in fact they're singular. I know, confusing. Watch out for phrases, okay? Watch out for phrases such as well as. That phrase can really get us into trouble in our writing, as well as. And so, and that's why I've got that one bolded. Together with, in addition to, including. There's a whole lot of different terms, phrases, clauses, what have you. A whole lot like that. Okay, watch out for these. So I'm gonna show. This is complicated. I'm gonna show you something here. In class, rarely does anyone get this correct. Okay, like when I'm actually doing it on the board, rarely. Like most people are very hesitant to even give an answer. Right? You'll see what I mean right now. Let's just say, okay, so in your notes, these phrases are not part of the subject of the sentence, okay? And so therefore they don't affect the verb. Now, let's say I had a sentence like, my typing teacher, as well as my advisor, then I have to choose has or have, suggested I switch programs, okay? I don't know why I gave that example, that sounds harsh, but anyway, okay, I think you get the idea. Okay. I'm going to show you two things here. One is complicated, one is incredibly simple. And it's going to go back to something I just talked about earlier in the lecture. My typing teacher, as well as. The minute I have a phrase like that, whatever comes next in that subordinate clause, remember, right? If we're getting complex now, whatever I have in that subordinate clause has nothing to do with the verb. With the verb conjugation, with the verb connection. So therefore, the answer, okay, whether it's has or have, is actually has. I know, like what? That doesn't make any sense. Well, actually, yeah, it does because of the way we've constructed the sentence. Now, let's just say, okay, you are incredibly confused right now. Let's just say, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. Okay, let's fix it. I believe it was in lecture 8 or 9 where I said the word and is your friend, right? And I suggested I was going to make a joke about daddy, but I didn't. Although I kind of just did now. You have to make the connection. Okay. I'm really confused now. I am really confused. We're at the bottom of page 4 and I don't know what the hell he's talking about. Okay, fine. Let's change the sentence. My typing teacher and my advisor have. Right? The minute we include the word have, okay, then all of a sudden, everything falls into place. because we now have a compound sentence instead of a complex sentence. Right? Remember all that from the last lecture? So and so that's why I was introducing you to all those things to begin with. Now we begin to see exactly how they play out. So, two things we want to talk about with that sentence. Well, if I have my typing teacher and my advisor, we don't need those commas because that doesn't follow any of the comma rules I gave you because of the word and. And now I know my verb. I know the verb is going to be have with a V because it's plural. But if I set it up the way that I have, and some people just have a habit of writing this way, and they simply make mistakes. If you write it this way, you need the commas. Then all of a sudden, the verb becomes has with an S. So that's why I'm saying the word and. I know it doesn't make for great writing, but at least you avoid mistakes. So once again, as I keep saying throughout the entire course, if you know how to do all this, don't worry about what I'm saying, right? You don't have to worry about it. But if you have difficulty with some of these things, then and can be a really helpful word. Like I said, it may not make for the most effective writing, right? It may be a bit obvious, but at least you're writing correctly. So I'm not telling you, if you are an A student and you do fine with the English language, I'm not telling you to change anything. But if you're not sure, then that's how you fix these things. Okay? All right. The next thing is pretty straightforward. Words ending in one body or thing, like someone, somebody, something, they all take on the singular. Okay? And if you were to ask me, well, why do we have those different types of forms? I have no idea. That's something that just usage over the years. Okay? All right. So yes, somebody is going to get hurt. That's my example. And then on the top of page 5, pretty straightforward as well, I believe. When you have words like either, okay, each or neither, okay, or you could pronounce it either or neither. Yeah, I was going to make another joke there, but who cares? Anyway. They take on the singular verb as well, right? Either was suitable or each wants to win. So all suitable. All singular. All suitable. All right. Here's an interesting one that I think most of you know through osmosis. And do you remember that term from high school, osmosis? Like basically, you know this rule, not even knowing the rule. You just know. But if someone is learning English for the first time, okay, well, I guess you don't learn English the second or third time, do you? But if someone is learning English, I don't know why I said it that way, but if someone is learning English, this is something that I have noticed with individuals whose first language isn't English, something called a helping verb. See if you've ever heard someone say something like this, okay? I be going to the store. I be going to the store. Someone who's learning the language may not understand that in a verb context, like the verb be, I be going to the store, there's actually a rule that says we need a helping verb there. We need another word. So most of you know that. You just know that, like it's just from growing up around the language. But helping verbs, this is what literally they're called. Could be phrases like shall, should, may, might. Like there's a whole lot. Will, that's a good one. Going back to my example, I will be going to the store, or I might be going to the store, right? And so in that regard, that's where we have helping verbs. So as I said, if you grew up in an English-speaking household, you know that just from listening. But let's say you have a parent or a guardian who is learning the language. That's the type of mistake that quite often they will make, only because they didn't grow up knowing this, right? They didn't grow up speaking that way. So that's an interesting one, right? I would suggest never correct anyone on that. That's just something that comes with learning the language. They already know another language, okay? So keep that in mind, right? I have this one friend who makes fun of individuals who have difficulty with their second language. But he only speaks one language, So it's like, well, their second language is a hell of a lot better than yours because you don't have one. So, and anyway, but I think you see what I'm getting at there. So, um, and also, yes, any verbs ending in ing. Isn't it funny? Ing, that's about the third time we've come across ing words, right? Remember gerunds, and then we had another example. I can't remember what it was. Oh, it doesn't matter. But ing words, isn't it funny how they pop up every once in a while, right? They can be problematic. And here's another one: a verb ending in ing must have a helping or a helping verb or verbs, like extra words, right? So he hitting the ball great last week. Well, no, he was hitting the ball great last week. Okay, and I know the word "great" is probably not the correct word, but that's the way you would say it. Okay. Anyway, and then the bottom of page 5, awfully straightforward. When we have multiple subjects and multiple verbs, right? And again, normally when we have multiple subjects and multiple verbs, you would be using the word and. You'd be creating compound sentences rather than complex. All right? I shouldn't say usually, you would be. Because the minute you start using words like but or what have you, then you start to get into the subordinate clauses, which then create the problem with subject-verb agreement, right? Yeah. So I'm sure maybe there's probably an exception or two there. Now that I think about it, okay, off the top of my head, I can't think of one. But for the most part, if you have multiple subjects or multiple verbs, you're probably connecting in a compound sentence with the word and, all right? Or other words that keep the flow going. Okay? So, Florence and Rome are two beautiful cities in Italy, right? And if you ever get the chance, Rome can be a crazy city to walk around in, but Florence is a beautiful city to walk around in. If you ever happen to be in Italy, and if you're into art, make a note of going to Florence. All right, and it's a very walkable city. Like you can just get around. You can't see everything in a day, but you can get around to most of the city center in a day. All right. Yeah, and the beautiful bridge that's there as well. Look it up. I'm not going to do all the work for you, but there's a really cool bridge. Um, Sorry, I'm getting memories now of Florence, but anyway. And then you can have multiple verbs. He elbowed and pushed his way through the crowd. What did he do? Elbowed, pushed. Elbowed and pushed. Then finally, you could have multiple subjects and multiple verbs. The sergeant and the detective leaped from their car and seized the suspect. So, sergeant, detective, subjects. Leaped, seized, verbs. What did they do? All right? Okay. Then we have a couple of, I don't know. This is interesting. The next thing we're going to talk about is the compound noun. And we're going to talk about, I'll give you the definition right there. The plurals of hyphenated or spaced compounds are pluralized, okay? And then notice the phrase or the clause that I have bolded by the chief element of the compound, okay? Now, this always confused me when I first learned this rule because to me, the chief element would be the word that can change. But it would be the word that remains constant. Sorry, let me say that again. To me, when I first learned this, I thought, well, the chief element would be the thing that stays constant. But in fact, it's the thing that can change. So, instead of saying mother-in-laws, I just heard someone yesterday use, what was the phrase? It was in sports. It had a connection to sports. It doesn't matter. Anyway, so mother-in-law. Right? So you have a mother-in-law. And by the way, that we happen to use hyphens when we write a phrase like that. That probably will not exist in a few years. I have no, like there were certain words as you all know, that we hyphenate, but we seem to be moving away from that. So there you go. That goes back to what I was saying before about how language changes, right? So I have a funny feeling but like by the time this airs, this might even be out of date. Okay, but if we were to pluralize mother-in-law, it would be mothers-in-law, not mother-in-laws, because the chief element, okay, would be the word that can change. So mothers-in-law, fathers-in-law, sisters-in-law, okay, brothers in whatever. Okay, So that's how we actually would pluralize a term like that. Same thing if you have a governor general. Governors general would be the plural, not governor generals. However, now I can really confuse you, okay? Although every year, I believe around February, there is the Governor General's Awards. Well, that's totally different because in that regard, Governor Generals, the generals would be general apostrophe S. The awards belonging to or about, or sorry, connected to the Governor General. Okay? I know, very confusing. So plural, governors general. But if you're talking about the possessive case, okay, then it would be governor generals with an apostrophe. Or it would be governors generals if you were talking about the plural possessive. Forget it. I won't quiz you on that. I promise, okay? I won't. That can get really confusing. If I was in a first year class right now, I'd be certainly thinking I'm dropping this course. I don't know what the hell I don't know what's going on. Yeah, it can get very, very complicated. But anyway, okay. Now, let's go back to lecture 1. And we'll talk a bit about quotation marks. The best. Remember? Quotation marks should only be used to offset quoted material. I know. But these are the things that I have to fix whenever I'm correcting papers, right? Quotation marks come in pairs. Make a note of that because I've actually had papers where I'll have like someone begins a quote with a quotation mark, but doesn't close it off with another quotation mark. So basically, the rest of the paper, I'm assuming, is an entire quote. Like, I know that's not true. I'm simply saying they come in pairs. Oh, there you go. All right. Now, the only thing I really have to explain about that would be a quotation within a quotation. All right? And when you have a quotation within a quotation, it's very simple. The double quotations go on the outside. All right. Then if you have the quote within the quote, that's where you have the singular. And if that's a bit confusing, we can talk about that in workshop, all right, in group, whatever. Okay. So, but keep in mind, if you have a quotation within a quotation, it happens every once in a while. It's rare, but it happens every once in a while. Just remember the double quotations outside, single quotes inside. Okay. Wasn't that cute the way I did that? Double quotes outside, single quotes inside. All right. Anyway, we've got about, 5-6 minutes left? Yeah. Capitalization. Okay? I know. Sounds obvious. You all know how to capitalize. Oh, do you? Do you? How you doing? Okay. So, in English, not all languages, but in English, we capitalize the first person pronoun, the word I, when referring to oneself. Why is that though? I have a good story about that. I'm sure many of us probably think, well, obviously you capitalize the word I. I'm important. Like that's not at all why we capitalize that word. It goes back to the 1400s and it goes back to movable type. So some of you may know about the Gutenberg press, right? 1435. And printers, when they were first setting up, like what we think of as like a photocopier today, right? Basically, printers would have pieces of type, and they would put them on a board, and you would tighten up the board and ink it, and then you could make copies. Okay. But printers started to notice, or readers started to notice, that many sheets that were printed kept leaving out the word I because I was such a small piece of type. So if it was meant on its own as the first person pronoun, quite often it simply wasn't included. And so printers started to realize, well, then maybe we should make this a bit bigger just so we can actually see it when we go to edit our type before we actually do the copying, right? That's how that came to be. Many letters have histories, right? Like they have stories on their own. W has a very interesting history because at one time W's looked like VV, and in fact, the letter U. I don't know why I'm telling you all this, but I just find this interesting. If you look at really old buildings, and especially with a name and then the word building, and they're carved in stone, like if the actual name of the building is carved in stone and the word building is included, if it goes back early enough, like I'm talking a couple of hundred years, then the U in building will actually be a V, right? Because it was easier to carve that way at one time. And then U comes in later on. Interesting stuff. I don't know. Maybe I just bored the hell out of you and really look like an egghead now. But anyway. Okay, number 2. We capitalize the first word of a sentence. Well, obviously you do. Really? Does every language do that? No. So again, you see, there are certain rules in English that are I don't want to say unique, but are rare. Okay? In fact, most languages do not capitalize the first word in a sentence. Do not capitalize the first word of a sentence. Think about it for a moment. English, yes, it's a dominant language, but there are languages in the world that are far more in use than English, right? And so, anyway, okay. Then we have the names of specific titles. So, Dr. Smith. So, if I said Dr. Smith as a title, then I would capitalize the D in doctor. But if I said I'm going to the doctor tomorrow, then I wouldn't, right? So it has to be a specific title. And then same thing with name of specific places. Okay, well, the name of specific places, what do I mean by that? That's a tough one. Because if I were to say, let's just say, next summer, okay, or winter or whatever, I'm going to go to the East Coast. Okay, in that regard, would I capitalize East? No, I wouldn't. Because there is no such place on a map as East Coast. Like there is, we can see the East Coast, but there isn't an actual place name, East Coast. But if I said to you, I'm going to go to North Carolina, well, now, yes, I would capitalize N because North Carolina is a specific place. So, the rule for that one is, can you find it on a map? And if you can find it on a map, okay, then you capitalize it. Like if that's the actual place name. But east, west, north, south, you don't capitalize those if you're using them generically. If I said I'm going out west this summer, I wouldn't capitalize that, okay? But there was one student a couple of years ago, and this made me laugh, put up their hand and said, well, actually, you can find northwest, east, and south on a map. I said, well, what do you mean, where? Well, at the top where they have that compass thing. I thought, yeah, all right, good enough. But no. All right. But I did think that was clever, right? Then you have, of course, the days of the week and the months of the year, but not the seasons. All right? Quite often, that is a mistake that many people do make, where they capitalize the seasons, right? So you don't do that. Although, I'm just trying to remember now, I might have the actual, the season. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of the title of the course and whether or not I capitalize that. But that's because it's part of a title. Okay? Now, this one is a bit confusing. In number 6, the titles of publications, okay, and movies, not including articles. But see, this is the definition, but this confuses people. When I say not including articles, I'm not talking about a journal article. I'm talking about words like an, a, like a, the. Those are articles. So you don't capitalize those. But if you said the world according to Garp, okay, then you would capitalize everything except the world. Yeah, you would capitalize world. You would capitalize according. You would not capitalize to, right? And then Garp. I could probably give you a better example than that. I think you get the idea, right? So think about it that way. The smaller words you don't capitalize, right? But the main words you do. That's not a definition, but I think you get the idea there. Okay? So that's what I mean by articles. And then finally, the names of races, nationalities, languages, and religions. Okay? Now, let's do a couple of quick ones just to see if we all follow this. Let's just say I said I'm going to drop by the economics department. Now, see, that's where things can become tricky. Would I capitalize that? No. No. Because that's not really the title of the department. But if I said I'm going to drop by the Department of Economics, then I would capitalize both the D and the E. So these things can get tricky, right? And then there's a couple of other things I could say as well here, but I think I'll avoid them for controversy. But we can talk about that in group as well, okay? All right? There are a couple of things that we could discuss there. Oh, and also, and you could challenge me on a couple of these things as well. Well, you're not challenging me. I didn't create these rules. But names. Well, there are some individuals who don't follow these rules, right? So in those cases, you would capitalize or not capitalize accordingly, right? There's some companies, in fact, that don't capitalize. If I'm not mistaken, and I'm going to say this word correctly, Adidas. Okay, you think of it as Adidas, but it's Adidas. For those of you who have traveled through Europe, I don't believe they capitalize, and there's others as well, right? So anyway, but those are the common rules. And so yeah, we're 41 minutes in. I figured we're almost done for the day. And then finally we have the subjunctive in English, and this is an interesting one because if you think about it. If you're relating to, let's just say you're relating to, okay, if I were you, that's the example that I have at the very end of the lecture. If I were you, well, think about that for a moment because I, you, those are both singular. So you would think that you would say, if I was you, but there's a special rule when it comes to verbs which express things that are either imagined or wished or possible. And in those cases, we actually use the word were, right? And so that is known as the subjunctive when things are not necessarily certain to happen. It's a weird one, I know. But again, most of you know this just from growing up in the language, right? And so basically then we use the subjunctive when talking about events, okay, that somebody wants to happen or will anticipate will happen or maybe imagines happening. And the example, I wish I were there to talk to you. So I'm imagining a possibility. Or if I were you, so again, right? Basically an imagined concept. And so if you ever watch the television show The Big Bang Theory, there is a great clip that I think I've included in Lecture 10 where it says the Big Bang subjunctive. And it all has to do with Sheldon playing bongos. Okay? So I'll double check that. If I forgot to include that, someone give me an email and I will. But anyway, okay, so 43 minutes, 44 minutes. That's Lecture 10. And so I'm going to give you a little tip now as we close off for the day. I'm going to do one more lecture, and it will be on comparative analysis. The simple way of saying that, comparison and contrast. Do not do that. Do not do that for your final term paper. But you may be asked to do that in another course. And if you are ever asked, then the lecture 11, will come in handy. What am I actually saying? You don't need to watch Lecture 11 for this course. So I just saved you an hour. Don't email me saying, did you really mean that? Yes, I really meant it. Okay? All right. So anyway, so that's Lecture 10. And we'll see you in group. Okay? All right. Have a great day. Bye.